Hello my gamer friends, this is your Citrus guy here. My name is Cloud Citrango, and for today we're gonna have a review and game analysis of Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. We'll talk about the Super Nintendo version and compare with the arcade version. That this game has popularized the genre of fighting games and revolutionized the gaming industry, this everyone already knows, creating patterns and elements that have defined the genre even nowadays. But it was the Super Nintendo version, in my opinion, that make the game please all the players, both arcade and consoles. So let's find out and understand in this video why this game was so good and influential and still playable and soft after even for the players of today. First, I would like to talk a little about my childhood and why the home versions of the arcade games influenced me more than the arcades themselves. For those who lived through the 80s and the 90s, have surely entered into an arcade house or a bar or a commerce that had an arcade machine. I'm not going to keep telling the whole story of the arcades and how they boosted the market and the world of video games. That's subject for another video. But just understand that for the time, it was a fever. Everybody spent money on many and many chips or coins to challenge the CPU or someone or to play along with someone against the CPU. Thanks to the arcades, there was a lot of social interaction between young people. For example, you were there playing, suddenly there comes a guy you never seen before to play with you, or to see you play, or you are watching him play. Then you start to talk about the game and other things, and then this guy becomes your friend. That was a cool thing at the time of the arcades. It was the magic of the video games to bring people together. Whereas today games, despite having online modes, don't help people make friends. You just play and that's it. That's something of the arcades that I believe is missing nowadays. It was more difficult for children to play on the arcade machines, either because of the height or difficulty of the controllers, or because of the lack of experience. It all affect our fun, especially when some big guy show up, challenge and defeat us, ending our fun. I bet this has happened to you too, right? Please share with us in the comments. The Super Nintendo, one of my first and favorite video games, proved to adapt very well the arcade versions, surpassing other home consoles competitors at the time, in my opinion. Something that I will also talk about in other videos of the channel. With the release of Street Fighter II for Super Nintendo, the Nintendo fans had a dream come true. I know the graphics and music weren't the same as in the arcade, but they weren't far behind. At last, arcade machine at home. Okay, I know it wasn't like an arcade experience, but we could call our friends and make some tournaments at home. What at the time it was the joy of our friends and neighbors. The game's story is based on a real concept that the best and the strongest fighters in the world are not the winners of the martial arts tournaments. Forget about NNA or UFC or any other tournament. The real fighters are those who fight without rules and for money, from the betting on the streets, in the alley, tournaments that are not broadcasts by any means, a kind of underground in the fighting world. That would be the world of Street Fighter. I would like to mention two cinema influences in the game. First, the hard times. In this movie, we see how the real street fighters were and how the underground of this world worked. How the fighters and batters made money. We will see X scenarios and places similar to the Street Fighter series, besides of course the fighting styles. It's a movie worth for watching. The other one is would be the Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. Although this movie doesn't really talk about street fighting, it's a it talks about a lot about tournaments and martial arts, and has influenced not only Street Fighter series, but many other games and movies. Now, talking about the story of the first Street Fighter, a game that takes place in the universe that I mentioned, we have as protagonists Ryu, the wandering Japanese warrior, and his friend Ken, the USA martial arts champion. Ryu entered the tournaments out for passion for fighting. He always wants to face stronger opponents, but Ken wants to fight for honor and glory, and to rival Ryu. This game, despite having excellent graphics and special movies, was not very successful at the time. Its controls were bad and the game mechanics still have a lot to improve, but still a great game and an important step for the fighting game genre in your time. The game ends with Sagat, the king of Muay Thai, being defeated by Ryu, leaving a scar on his chest, a trademark registered throughout the Street Fighter series, and the game ends with a message saying that no matter how strong you are, there will always be someone who can beat you. Something that, in my opinion, is the truest truth, whether in video games or everything else in life. Now let's talk about the story of Street Fighter 2. But before we talk about the new protagonists, I want to talk about the antagonist, Bison, or Vega in the Japanese version. Bison was a ex-military from some country in South Asia, one of those countries that had many wars. He creates a criminal organization called Shadaloo, and in the story of the game, Shadaloo had already assumed global proportions. It was already quite powerful in drug trafficking, gun trafficking, and almost every kind of corruption that exists in the world. Bison believed that the street fighters will make good leaders in his organization by being influential members and excellent killers. In addition to Bison, we have also three other members in the game: the boxer Balrog, the torero Vega, and Sagat from the first game. Speaking now of the game's protagonists, most of them are unaware of the Shadowloo involvement behind the tournament. Most of them fight for glory and fame, among other reasons. Let's talk first about the characters with simpler stories, and then we will talk about the characters with more weight in the game's plot. Edmond Honda, the Sumo World Champion, enters the tournament to popularize his fighting style and to honor his disciples. Although he is not a very fast character, but he is certainly one of the best characters to play in the entire series. His game mechanics are very simple, and his combos deal a large amount of damage, making him one of the strongest characters in the entire Street Fighter series. Dhalsim has his own fighting style, something related to yoga, body and mind control. In addition to Yoga Fire, he can levitate, stretch his arms and legs, and in some versions of the game he teleports. Dawson's motives in the tournament vary across the versions of the game. In some, he fights for fame and glory. In others, he investigates the disappearance of children in India, something related to the grooming of minors in childhood. Although he is a little slow, he is an excellent character, but his game mechanics are a little bit complex. Generally, Dawson is only played by the more experienced Street Fighter players.
Round two, fight! Yoga fire! Yoga fire! Yoga fire!
Only little is known about Blanca's story,
One,
whether in relation to his past or his appearance. He was on a plane that crashed in the Amazon and started to live in the jungle with the animals. His fighting style is kind of animalistic. About his gaming mechanics, very easy to master, and his combos deal a lot of damage, which makes him a very popular character in the Street Fighter series. Zangief enters the tournament for the glory of his country. In some versions, he represents the Soviet Union. In others, he represents Russia. Zangief is one of those exaggeratedly patriotic guys, the real boring ones. His fighting style is Greco-Roman, or wrestling, and believe if you want, in his training, he fought with bears in Siberia. Yeah, that's what you heard, he fought wrestling with bears. Despite having a somewhat complex game mechanic, it's not difficult to master. Zangief, in my opinion, is the strongest character in the game. I know you will disagree with me, but yes, Zangief is the strongest character and his combos and moves are, are the ones that deal the most damage, not only in this version, but in the entire Street Fighter series. Talking now about Ryu, the main protagonist of the entire Street Fighter series, we have the Wandering Warrior from Japan. He lives off street fighting, and Ryu's dream is always to face stronger opponents until the day he finds the perfect battle. It seems like something very romantic, but in my opinion, seeing nowadays, it's a half-empty story and not very well elaborated, but it's okay. Speaking of Ken, Ryu's childhood friend, trained together and have the same master, Ken enters the tournament not only for glory and fame, but also to rival Ryu. Not there is any rancor or hatred between them. No, just a very sporty rivalry between friends. There was some rumors that Shadaloo have kidnapped Ken's fiancée to force him to the tournament, but this was never proven in any version of the game. Basically, Ken is the American version of Ryu to rival Ryu forever in Street Fighter series. About the game mechanics of these two characters, which in this version of the game are practically the same, we have fireballs, anti-air attacks, and combos with reasonable amount of damage, making these two the most practical and playable characters in the entire Street Fighter series. Speaking now of the characters that have more weight in this game's story, we have the protagonist Chun-Li. Chun-Li is an Interpol agent. She enters the tournament to dismantle the Shadaloo organization by defeating its leaders who are in the tournament, especially Bison, who was her father's killer. Regarding her game mechanics, She has a differential in speed and air attack, having some moves that others don't. In this version of the game, she still doesn't have fireballs, something that, in my opinion, is not missing at all. Chun-Li is one of the most complete characters in the entire Street Fighter series, and her combos deals excellent amount of damage. Gaio is a military from the American Air Force. Although the armed forces also fight against Shadaloo, the real reason that Gaio enters the tournament is revenge, because Bison murders his best friend, Charlie. Gaio abandons his family and everyone he knows to join in this hate journey against Bison. Regarding his game mechanics, he has more defensive tactics than offensive ones. Not that he's not good for combos, on the contrary, he's one of the best characters for this, but he aims more at the counter-attack than the attack. Gaio has the best defense I have ever seen. But what makes Street Fighter 2 so successful? That he really revolutionized the market, the world of video games, and the fighting genre, everyone already knows. I'm not going to stay here talking about the amazing graphics and the music and the game characters. No, I want to talk about the variation of moves, fireballs, anti-air attacks, throwing moves, among other things. Especially about the combo system. I think that even the Capcom didn't expect that the combos was going to be such a success. But they created three variations of punch buttons and kick buttons, and we could even combine them with special moves. Let's not forget about the counter blows. Counter blow is when you make a special move in the last second before your opponent hits you. That's way your attack will take more damage. Most of the players of Street Fighter do not know about the counter blows. Finally, a solid fighting game system. That was the real reason what made this game so successful at the time. Okay, but for those who don't know the game, how the game works, at the beginning of the game you have the start game, which is basically the arcade mode. In the home versions we have the VS Battle, where you can play freely with the player 2, how many times you want. And we will also have the options, where you can change the difficult level, remove the time limit, configure the buttons, among other things. In the character selection screen, we will select only one character to face all the others. In this version, you don't fight yourself. You will see that for each defeated opponent, it will be crossed off the map. The player 2 also can challenge you. In the Japanese version, when you defeat the player 2, the character defeated is crossed off the map too. I confess that when I was a child and I didn't want to face a character, I used to use the player 2 to get rid of him. How about you? Have you done this too? In this version, there is only the 2-round system. That is, the fight only ends if you win or lose 2 rounds, with only 2 rounds of draws. In other versions of the game, you can determine between 1 or even 3 rounds of victory or defeat. After you defeat everyone on the map, the final bosses, who are the members of Shadaloo, will appear. Lastly, you will face Bison. Only after defeating Bison, you will see the character's ending and his true motivation behind the tournament. As is tradition in arcade games, when you finish the game, you can type your initials, which for our time was a very nostalgic and worthwhile to see our score among the best of that arcade machine. Let's not forget to talk about the bonus stages, a joy for beginners or more experienced players. In this version, we only have two bonus stages, as the brick wall only had at the home versions. It was normal at the time for the arcades to have superior capabilities to the consoles, having better graphics, music, and sounds than any home versions. But the Super Nintendo version was not far behind in these points, and even innovated in others. So let's compare and see the main one differences. The Classic Open was not present in any version of Super Nintendo, although it was in other console versions. Some images of the ends did not exist or were different. There is no critical musics from the stages, being replaced by the same music, only faster. With respect to the graphics, are very similar, but it has a feature that needs to be commented. In the arcade version, the fighters are bigger and closer to the center of the screen. In the Super Nintendo version, they are a little smaller, which gives you a great coverage of the area of the stage, and you can see better how much space you have. There are a few different ways to perform some moves here. I mean simple attacks, not the special moves. But even the more experienced arcade gamers won't notice it. But after all, on what does the Super Nintendo version surpass the arcade version? In my opinion, the difference is in the game speed. The Super Nintendo version is a little slower than the arcade version, creating a game speed more comfortable with the combo system. This speed is perfect for the beginner players and it's satisfying even for the players of other Street Fighter titles or other game series. When saying this, some may be thinking, what about the turbo version, where you can choose the speed level of the game? I know that the turbo version has these speed levels, which are excellent for more experienced players, but even the normal mode of the turbo version doesn't have the same speed at this version. In my opinion, Street Fighter II: The World Warrior from Super Nintendo has the perfect game speed for learning to play fighting games. If you have never played fighting games, start with this version. Now talking about the positive points of the game, I could mention several, but I will just focus on three. The first is the level of difficulty. This version has a balanced level of difficulty, even rising to the difficult to the maximum. It's not that absurd and incoherent thing that doesn't respect the player. All players will learn to play with constant difficult levels. The second point will be the game speed in harmony with the combo system and the counterattacks, whether to make short and practical combos or to make more difficult and technical combos and complex combos. The game and its speeds will facilitate this.
Sonic boom! Sonic boom! Sonic boom!
The third point will be the physical sizes of the characters. With exception of Ryu and Ken, who in this version are almost identical, the others have different physical size and movements and specifics. To better compare, let's cite Mortal Kombat, another great fighting game. One of the flaws of this game, in my opinion, is that all the characters have equal movement and attacks. Except for the special moves, You are playing with a character almost identical to the another. Same speed, same physique, and same attacks. In Street Fighter, each punch and kick of your character is different and personalized. One of the good things of Capcom games, in my opinion. Even a masterpiece as Street Fighter 2 has its negative points. Regarding the gaming mechanics, I would like to mention three of them. The first will be the difference of amount of damage of the same blow. You are about to end the round with your final blow, and even executing the move perfectly doesn't cause the same amount of damage as you expected. This is a very common situation in almost of the entire series. I'm not talking about when you do the move wrongly or in different, like Shoryuken technique, for example, that causes more damage on the ground than in the air. No, that's not it. See, for example, Sagat's Tiger Uppercut move. If this move hits you, it will do a lot of damage. But if you dodged and hit Sagat, even using the weak hit buttons, you do a lot of damage in Sagat. Which sounds like a good thing, actually isn't. This situation does show how the game doesn't manage well the amount of damage from each blows. Another problem in the game is the knocked out. Knocked out or dizzy condition it would be when you receive some blows and stand for a time to receive an attack from your opponent. The problem is that in this version, it's very easy to get knocked out. You can stay like that for take 3 or even 2 hits. To get rid of this condition, you need to press the buttons very quickly. But if you don't have the turbo control, you will hardly be able to get rid of this condition before your opponent attacks you. I'm particularly against this knockout condition, because I think it's kinda unfair to be attacked when you can defend yourself. The third point will be the grab condition. In this condition resembles a throw, but it's continuous. That is, you don't release the opponent and you are constantly dealing damage. It's a condition caused by Blanca, Dhalsim, and other characters in the game. The problem is that in some cases, the CPU doesn't let you go of you. It stays like and that until your life bar is over. In theory, you can press the buttons to get rid of this condition, but you can rarely let it go. In some cases, even though you are within 100% of your life bar, and then you die. You lost the round because you was caught only once. So be careful, because in this version of Street Fighter, this condition is really unfair. Whether it's the additional elements like Ryu doing Shoryuken in a waterfall, or the lack of small details like Gaio staying at Bison instead of position in victory, we have here one of the best home versions of an arcade game ever made. Street Fighter has forever marked the video game industry, popularizing the fighting game genre, but it was the Super Nintendo version, in my opinion, that made all these elements come together and also made all the players love the games of fighting, making them more accessible, whether for children or adults. Even people who don't like fighting games hardly see Street Fighter 2, the World War Super Nintendo version, and fall in love with the game. This version really has a different magic. Whether for players of the 90s or for today gamers looking for fighting games, Street Fighter 2, the World War version of Super Nintendo, marked all those who played, staying forever in your lives and in your hearts. Hello my gamer friends, this is your Citrus guy here. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please give a like and subscribe. If you enjoy the classic games, the olders and the not that olders, this is your channel. I'm sure you're gonna like these games we're gonna talk about it and the subjects we're going to discuss. Thank you so much for watching the whole video and may God be with you. See you on next video.